What exactly is the green light? Green light is the word used in the film industry to describe when a studio provides the approval for a project that an individual has been working on producing. It indicates that you are able to carry on, advance, or proceed. Green lights in the eyes of Matthew McConaughey may be found anywhere and everywhere in life. It may take the form of an unexpected present, a reassuring pat on the back, or the opportunity to begin again. Matthew has discovered over the course of his life that one can begin to produce their own green lights when they take the appropriate approach and have the appropriate mindset. The first step, which he refers to as becoming relative with the inevitable, is the first step. There are some things in life that cannot be avoided. There is no guarantee that every plan will be executed without a hitch. But the way in which you respond to difficulties is relative. It's up to you to decide how to proceed. No matter what you're going through, if you have the correct mentality, you can learn from it and develop from it. Tough love. The McConaughey family has been known to produce its share of lawbreakers in the past. Thefts of cattle, gambling, and even a bodyguard for the notorious Chicago criminal Al Capone were all parts of this family's history. The lineage of the family may be followed all the way back to Ireland, starting in New Orleans, going through West Virginia, then to Liverpool in England, and finally arriving there. Jim McConaughey, Matthew McConaughey's father, was born in Louisiana, but the family moved to Texas, where he worked hard to become successful in the oil business as a pipe salesman. Matthew McConaughey is named after his father. Katie, his mother, was originally from Altoona, Pennsylvania. However, she always claimed that she was from Trenton, New Jersey. Why not just admit what you know to be true? To put it another way, she asked, who would want to be from a place called Altoona? Both sets of parents adhered to some unconventional beliefs, which they instilled in their offspring. Additionally, the parents' relationship with one another was contentious, to say the least. However, there was never a lack of affection in the end. In 1974, when Matthew was only 5 years old, he vividly recalls an especially memorable argument that took place between his parents. Jim had just made it home after a very hard day at the office. Katie brought out a dish of food that had been kept warm in the oven even though everyone else had already eaten. This was done because everyone else had already eaten. Katie's response to Jim's request for additional potatoes was, "Are you sure you want more potatoes, fat man?" At first, Jim did not bite on the bait that was being offered, but Katie continued to yell at him, calling him a fat guy and piling heapful spoons of mashed potatoes onto his plate. Eventually, Jim stood up and hurled the table into the air in response to Katie's behavior. As he got closer to her, he asked, "Katie, you just can't let things go the way they are, can you?" However, when he got closer, Katie grabbed the phone out of his hand, swung it into his face, and caused him to suffer a broken nose. Then she pulled out a knife and threatened to chop him wide open, but he managed to escape. Jim, who was bleeding heavily from his face and onto his shirt, reached for a bottle of ketchup and held it in his hands as though it were a sword and he were a matador. Katie was splattered with ketchup as he waved the bottle about, which caused the ketchup to come out in streaks. "Touché," Jim remarked as he moved about the kitchen while dancing. They followed one another around the room until they were both coated in ketchup. Katie finally put down the knife, which was covered in blood. After Jim dropped the ketchup, the two dove headfirst into an intense embrace with each other. The next thing I knew, they were making love while lying on the ground. In the end, Matthew's mother and father both ended up divorcing their respective partners. However, they ended up being married to each other 3 times. After she had poked him in the face on multiple occasions, the man's father shattered his mother's middle finger on each of those occasions. This was the means by which they communicated with one another. They showed their affection for one another in this way. Matthew was given a few spankings of his own when he was a child for things such as telling one of his 2 brothers that he despised him or stating the 2 words, "I can't." Matthew was the youngest of the 4 children. These were valuable experiences and lessons that were gained. This was the method by which he was instructed to never be hateful and to never assert that one is unable to do something. Outlaw Logic. Matthew expressed interest in participating in a poetry contest when he was in the 7th grade. Instead of submitting one of his own poems, however, his mother advised that he submit a poem written by the author Anne Ashford. First and foremost, he needed to comprehend and appreciate the poem. According to her reasoning, a poem belonged to a person once they had both liked and comprehended it, and even if they did discover that he hadn't written it, then what? They could have, at the worst, taken away the award, which is not a particularly serious matter. As it turned out, Matthew's strategy of leveraging the Ashford poem to win the competition was successful. Katie McConaughey had a difficult childhood, and this line of reasoning may sound unusual to some people. She was forced to go through numerous circumstances that did not appear to be fair. Thus, she was forced to develop her own set of ideals, which Matthew refers to as outlaw logic. Matthew was, in some ways, being prepared for the imaginative storytelling he would be undertaking as an actor by virtue of her other world. Matthew and his brothers received an education in lawless reasoning. However, the approach that his father took was much more extreme. According to him, in order for a boy to become a man, he had to stand up to his father at some point. When Matthew's oldest brother Mike was 22 years old, this clash took place in his family's life. By that time, Mike had successfully followed in his father's footsteps to become the top pipe salesman at the company. After the two of them had been imbibing beers in the barn for a while, the father came up with the concept of Roland pipe one night. This is the term used for breaking into the pipe yard of a competitor in the middle of the night with the intention of stealing some of their pipe. The only problem was that Mike's father intended to take pipe from Don Knowles, who was one of Mike's most successful accounts. Mike was adamant in his refusal, but Jim had no intention of giving up that simply. Mike was going to have to put up a struggle if he wanted to test his mettle and go against what his father wanted for him in this situation. Mike was only 5'10" and 180 pounds, but Jim was 6'4" and 265 pounds. Nonetheless, once Mike's father punched him square in the jaw, Mike didn't have much of a choice, since his father didn't offer him much of an option. Mike was stumbling around on the ground of the barn when he noticed a 2x4 piece of wood nearby. Mike grabbed the plank and slammed it against the side of the father's skull. Mike was knocked back down to the ground as Jim retaliated with another powerful blow while he was still dazed and bleeding from his ears. This time Mike tossed a handful of dirt in Jim's face after taking a handful of it in his palm. Although temporarily blinded, Jim was nevertheless prepared to engage in combat. Where is my son who has refused to smoke Dan Knowles' pipe with his grandfather? Mike gave his father a warning that he would strike him again with the 2x4 if he didn't stop, but Jim only encouraged Mike's son to keep going at it. Therefore, it should come as no surprise when Mike knocked his father out cold with one more blow to the skull. Not until then did Jim rise to his feet, wipe the tears from his eyes, and then embrace Mike. After that point, they were on equal footing. Embracing loneliness. Matthew was having a great year in 1988. He was dating the prettiest girl in his school as well as the prettiest female in the school across town, and his classmates had voted him most handsome. He was also dating the cutest girl in the school across town. When he was a senior in high school, things seemed to be going in the right direction. He would roll his pickup truck into the parking lot first thing in the morning and entertain his pupils with it. Because the front grille of the truck was equipped with a megaphone, he was able to slouch in his seat while driving and making comments to the effect of, "Look at the jeans Kathy Cook's got on today. She's looking nice." After he graduated from high school, though, things followed a different path. Matthew, eager to get out of his comfort zone and experience new things, decided to become an exchange student in Australia through the Rotary Club. From the very beginning, there was an ominous air about the room. At the airport in Sydney, members of the Dooley family, including the family patriarch Norvell Dooley, his wife Marjorie, and one of their two sons, Michael, were there to welcome him. As Matthew, Norvell, and the others made their way home from the airport, Matthew's expectations were in a state of perpetual flux. He was under the impression that the Dooley household was located in Sydney, but before long he noticed that the skyline of the city was receding in the distance behind him. At first, Norvell related that he had moved to Gosford, where they currently reside. However, the beaches of Gosford quickly became a distant memory, just as Sydney's beaches had done. Matthew was subsequently informed by Norvell that they had moved to Toukley due to the questionable moral standards that prevailed in Gosford. Pleasant life in the country can be had in Toukley, but Norvell kept driving. "Toukley's a great sight, mate, but a tad huge for our taste," said the traveller. Soon after that, the beaches and the majority of the indications of civilization were nowhere to be found. The final sign that Matthew noticed was for the town of Warnervale, which had a population of 305. When they came up to the Dooley home, there were no other houses or buildings in the area that they could see. Novell beamed as he greeted Matthew with a warm smile and the words, "Welcome to Australia. You're going to enjoy it." The reality was that it was a nightmare that lasted for an entire year. Nevertheless, Matthew views it as an experience that he is grateful to have had even to this day. Before coming to Australia, Matthew had never been subjected to the level of loneliness and isolation that he was forced to go through there. But he'd already pledged to the Rotary Club that he'd survive the whole year, and they'd even shaken hands on the deal. He wasn't about to go back on his word now that they'd already committed to. Therefore, Matthew persisted. He became aware that in order to achieve this goal, he required organization in his life, so he decided to compete against himself. He adhered to the vegetarian lifestyle, in addition to abstinence. He gave serious thought to entering a monastery and devoted the rest of his life to the cause of liberating Nelson Mandela. He had never experienced anything like that, yet he managed to go through the whole year despite how difficult it was. It would be some time before he understood it, but ultimately the suffering and isolation he endured in Australia proved to be a valuable learning experience. Never before had he been put in a situation where he had to look deep and try to determine who he truly was once the girls, the family, and the popularity were removed from the equation. When he thinks about it now, he can see how much this journey contributed to making him the guy he is today. Career shifts. Matthew, newly returned from his trip to Australia, immediately set his sights on Dallas. He was really interested in attending Southern Methodist University as the following significant stage in his life. But his father questioned him persistently. "Are you sure? Have you ever considered being a Longhorn?" He was referring to the animal that serves as the symbol of the University of Texas at Austin. Matthew had submitted his application to the University of Texas at Austin. However, at the time, he was seriously considering a career as a lawyer, and he reasoned that Dallas would offer more prospects at a greater number of law firms. Despite this, his father continued to inquire about UT. After that, his brother Pat called him and questioned the same thing over the phone. On the other hand, Pat was able to give some light on the matter at this time. UT was a public university, while Southern Methodist University was a private institution. His father's financial situation was precarious at the time because of the downturn in the oil industry. Because it is a state university, the University of Texas would be a lot more affordable for him. Pat has also provided a glowing recommendation for Austin. He added that if you went to a bar in Austin, you could go in wearing flip-flops and be sitting next to a cowboy, a lesbian, and a Native American with a small person pouring drinks. He also said that you could have a Native American serve you a drink. Pat told him that the town was just what you're looking for. It was decided in this manner. After another year had passed, though, Matthew was beginning to have second thoughts about his decision to become a lawyer. It was starting to hit him that he would be well into his 30s before he could even get his career off the ground, what with all the schooling and experience that was required. To his good fortune, his pal Rob Bindler sowed the seed of another notion to his mind. After reading some of the short stories that Matthew had been writing, Rob had the idea that Matthew could try his hand at the film industry. At first, the concept was almost laughably artful and extravagant, but after some time he began to have a hard time shaking it from his head. He was obligated to give his father the news by calling him. Making that phone call was a challenge. He fidgeted nervously as he tried to formulate a response and determine the appropriate moment to deliver it. He settled upon 7:30 p.m. The meal would have been cleared off the table, and now Dad would be unwinding in front of the television with a drink in hand. A favorable moment to make the announcement. It was 7:36 o'clock when he called, and he was sweating and anxious. His father greeted him with, "Hey there, buddy, what's going on?" Gulp. He immediately plunged in and began explaining the predicament. It turned out that he wasn't cut out for a career in the legal field. He had the ambition to attend a film school. Following an extended period of silence lasting 5 seconds, a calm and inquisitive voice could be heard coming through the phone. It wasn't that his father was angry, rather he was just making sure that this was something that his son genuinely desired to accomplish. Matthew was certain of it. The final words of the father's monologue were, "Well, don't half-ass it." Matthew Matthew received the very best possible response he could have hoped for. It was an extremely obvious go signal. First break. As soon as Matthew started attending the film school at UT Austin, he realized that it was not like other schools. When it came to obtaining work, grades were not going to be relevant in any way. He needed to do something or build something that would catch people's attention. However, despite the fact that he wasn't the best student in terms of attending all his classes, he was ambitious and driven from the very beginning of his academic career. He got a handful of low-level contracts after signing with a local talent agency and putting his name out there. However, it was a chance meeting that ultimately led to him getting his big break. Matthew was a frequent guest at the Hyatt Hotel, where his friend Sam worked as a bartender. Sam was kind enough to buy Matthew drinks on the house. One evening, Sam provided him with some advance warning. A man who was standing at the end of the bar explained that he was in town to produce a film that was going to be shot in Austin. Don Phillips was the name of that individual. It came out that Don enjoyed drinking vodka tonics and playing golf, both of which were activities that Matthew was fairly proficient in. He stayed there for a few hours and competed with Don drink for drink until the Hyatt personnel had to help them check out of the hotel. After that, they got in a cab and split a joint, which is when Don proposed to Matthew and told him there was a part in this movie that he was working on that Matthew may be great for. After that, they parted ways and Don continued working on the movie. Just come up at this address tomorrow morning, he continued, and pick up the script. Richard Linklater penned the screenplay and directed the film Dazed and Confused, which is now widely regarded as a classic. The role was for a character named Woodison, who's in his 20s but still socializes with high school students in his hometown. Only 3 of Woodison's scenes were written into the original script. However, this started to alter on Matthew's very first day working on the set. When Matthew arrived, he was wearing a moustache reminiscent of the 1970s. He was wearing a t-shirt featuring Ted Nugent and had a tattoo of a Black Panther on his forearm. Linklater inspected him thoroughly and found it to be wonderful. He said that this is amazing and this is Woodison. Almost immediately, the director found himself coming up with fresh concepts. Matthew and Linklater played their first round of what the author refers to as verbal ping-pong, a game that they've continued to play over the course of their decades-long friendship. Soon after, Linklater had the inspiration to provide Woodison with a new scenario in which he attempts to pick up a smart-mouthed redhead with his smooth skills. Matthew was questioned by Linklater if he thought Woodison would be interested in a girl like that. Yes, Matthew responded. After hearing this, he had the following response. Sure, man, Woodison likes all kinds of ladies. In the end, what began as 3 simple sequences turned out to be Matthew's primary focus of a period of 3 weeks of work. During the first of these 3 weeks, however, Matthew was dealt a devastating blow of learning that his father had passed away. Jim McConaughey awoke one morning and proceeded to have sexual relations with his wife. At the most intense point, he had a heart attack and passed away. It might seem strange, but he genuinely confessed to his sons, "When I leave, I'm going to be making love to your mother," before he passed away. This is precisely what he ended up doing. Fame. Matthew was a bit player in Dazed and Confused, but it was another film that propelled him to the forefront of the entertainment industry. It was called A Time to Kill, and was directed by Joel Schumacher. The book that it was based on was written by John Grisham. Matthew was one of Schumacher's first casting choices for the role of a Ku Klux Klan commander. However, Matthew was really interested in playing the major role of Jake Briggins, a lawyer. Matthew arrived well prepared, having even read the source material from which the movie was adapted. Although Schumacher appreciated Matthew's self-assurance and thought the proposal was interesting, he was aware that the studio would not go along with it. Then an unexpected turn of events took place. The production company had already decided to cast Woody Harrelson in the role of the male protagonist. But all of a sudden, he was taken out of the running after a man and a woman in Mississippi committed a murder and said they were inspired by the film Natural Born Killers, which stars Harrelson as one half of a serial-killing couple. In the film, Harrelson plays one of the serial killers in the couple. At this moment, Schumacher was in the mood to be kind, so he agreed to film a test scene with Matthew, which the 2 of them could then present to the executives of the company. Matthew knew it was a long shot, but he was determined to show that he was the appropriate person for the part. The test was for the most important and dramatic scene of the case, which took place in the courtroom. It was a significant scene, and he was anxious, but he remembered every word of his lines. When Schumacher told him that he could begin the scene whenever he was ready, he jumped right into it and nailed all of the appropriate points. precisely as he was supposed to. However, nobody was going to be shocked or surprised by it. Therefore, Schumacher instructed Matthew to deviate from the script. For the sake of using his own words, must speak to the hypothetical jurors in the same manner that he would if this were actually his case, to envision himself in the role of the character. It appeared that Schumacher was giving him permission to proceed. It was a brilliant move on Schumacher's side to come up with the idea. Matthew exposed his true self to the fullest extent possible and gave the scene everything he had, to the point where by the time it was over he was dripping with sweat and feeling queasy. After 2 weeks, Schumacher gave him a call and extended the invitation to play the part. It was a role that quite literally altered the course of his life. On the Monday after the show's release, Matthew was no longer able to go to his favorite tuna fish sandwich restaurant in complete secrecy in order to order extra pickles and ketchup on the side of his sandwich. On that particular day, as he made his way to the sandwich store, every person who passed him on the street stared at him, with the exception of a blind guy and 3 infants. He could now be considered officially famous. Hitting the road. In the week leading up to the release of A Time to Kill, nearly all of the scripts that Matthew found appealing were unavailable. After that, the decision was up to him. It might sound like a dream come true, but when popularity reaches you so quickly, it can mess with your perceptions of what's actually going on in the world. If you want to keep your feet on the ground, you might have to take certain precautions to prevent yourself from floating away into the ether. This necessitated a trip for Matthew to the Monastery of Christ in the desert, which is located in a remote part of New Mexico. The monastery is revered as a holy site. It was explained to him as a location where one might go to readjust their perspective, which was exactly what he was looking for. He wanted to go there. A walk of 13.5 miles brought him to the front entrance of the monastery, where he was greeted by Brother Andre, who informed him that the monastery was a safe haven for all visitors. In order to get there, he had to make the trek. However, it was Brother Christian who demonstrated to be the best listener, and at that particular time, that was precisely what Matthew required. Matthew shared with Brother Christian that he was having a difficult time becoming the upstanding citizen he aspired to be because of his fame. The veneer was beginning to be broken through by feelings of lust as well as objectification. He had the impression that he was cut off from his history and was unable to see the way forward in front of him. In a nutshell, he lacked direction. Matthew was reduced to tears by the time he had finished unburdening himself of his burden. He anticipated that Brother Christian would have some harsh words for him, or that he would pass some severe judgment on him, but nothing of those things transpired. After showing compassion by listening attentively for more than 3 hours, the only thing he had to say was, "Me too," after a lengthy silence. Now, this piece of advice wasn't exactly going to revolutionize his life, but despite that, it was still a very significant go-ahead for Matthew. Compassion and understanding are all that are required at other times. Sometimes the release that comes from realizing that we're not the only ones going through anything is the only thing that can keep us from falling apart completely. Now, it would still be some time before Matthew figured out how to keep his attention fixed on the things that were truly important. However, one of the things that he did early on to keep his feet on the ground was to actually keep moving. He purchased a mobile house with a length of 28 feet and then spent the next 3 years exploring the world with his dog, Miss Hud. They went everywhere from Canada to Guatemala. They went to watch the Cult play a concert in Detroit the next week if he expressed an interest in doing so. Let's go to the game in New York on Saturday if Roger Clemens is going to be pitching there. If he were to get a job working on a film directed by Steven Spielberg that was being shot in Rhode Island, he'd be able to park the Airstream and walk to work every day. But he could also pull off the road into a trailer park in western Montana, stroll into a bar and have a heck of a night drinking tequila, swapping stories and rolling dice with folks who could keep him honest and grounded in reality. Slaying Dragons. In the early 2000s, Matthew appeared alongside Jennifer Lopez in the romantic comedy The Wedding Planner, which was his first foray into the genre of romantic comedies. A string of unsuccessful films such as Ed TV and Contact was broken by the success of the movie, which was also a smash. On Sunset Boulevard, Matthew moved into the illustrious Chateau Marmont Hotel, which throughout the years had played host to a large number of famous musicians, actors, and painters. Matthew joined this illustrious group. In addition to beginning to ride a Triumph Thunderbird motorcycle, he maintained an open tab in the amount of $120,000. Matthew was once again left wondering, what does it all amount to, as he indulged in a string of hedonistic flings, affairs, and transactions. You could refer to it as an existential crisis, but Matthew would rather use the term existential challenge. In addition, he was more than up for the tasks that it entailed. To Matthew's good fortune, the ideal part came around just in time to help him get through it. The title of the film was Reign of Fire, and it was about as far from a romantic comedy as he could get. Matthew described his character as an apocalyptic badass dragon killer, and the name of his character, Denton Van Zandt, was taken from that description. Matthew made the decision to shave his head entirely bald in preparation for the role. This occurred for a few of different reasons. First, he thought it was fitting for the character, and second, his hairline had been receding for some time, and he wanted to use a serum called Regenix, which was claimed to function better on a shaven head. He decided to shave his head. In addition to this, he sequestered himself for a period of 2 months on the ranch that belonged to his brother in West Texas, where he followed a daily 4-step routine designed to fortify both his mind and body. This routine started off with consuming 2 shots of tequila first thing in the morning on a daily basis. He reasoned that in order for Van Zandt to prevail over the dragon, he would need to have dragon breath of his own. The second step was to complete a barefoot 5-mile run through the Texas desert. After all, Van Zandt would want thick skin on the bottoms of his feet in order to be successful. Step 3 consisted of him standing on the edge of the barn's rooftop in order to overcome his phobia of heights. And the fourth phase was for him to become accustomed to taking on large beasts like dragons by first taking on cows while they were sleeping at night. You might have predicted correctly that this routine didn't go on for very long. By the 6th morning, the tequila was making Matthew throw up. Jogging barefoot was giving him awful blisters, and he was unable to get anywhere near the edge of the roof in the pond no matter how hard he tried. As for the cows, on the 9th day he was knocked unconscious by one of them, and after that he learned his lesson and never went near them again. Matthew was left feeling wounded and battered, but spiritually strong after enduring the anguish and isolation of his dragon slayer training for 60 days and the difficult conditions of filming the movie over the winter in Ireland. The procedure assisted him in overcoming the vanity that had taken over his life, and as a result he emerged from it feeling more in control of his own course of events. It was time to turn the page to the next chapter. Chasing the Dream. In his life, Matthew McConaughey had had 3 non-sexual wet dreams. Each one arrived when his life needed sorting out, and each prompted a soul-searching journey. The first occurred in 1994, just after the sudden stardom of A Time to Kill. In the dream, Matthew was floating in the Amazon River, with anacondas and pythons coiled around his body. Crocodiles, sharks, and piranhas circled nearby. Along the edge of the river stood a never-ending row of indigenous Africans. The dream lasted all of 11 seconds. It was powerful, almost like a nightmare. But it wasn't only a wet dream, it was also an important green light. Matthew quickly began to page through an atlas looking for the Amazon River. At first he searched Africa, looking for the people he'd seen in his dream. A couple of fruitless hours later he realized the river was in South America. Immediately he knew this was where he needed to go. He shoved some clothes into a backpack, packed a camera, a journal, and a hit of ecstasy, and set off on a 3-week trip to Peru. Something was telling him he needed to float in the Amazon. Along the way he hiked the Andes, visited Machu Picchu while listening to John Mellencamp on his Walkman, and then settled into a camp in Iquitos, a city known as the Peruvian capital of the Amazon. At this point in his life, Matthew didn't like who he'd become, and so, sitting in his tent, he questioned everything about who he was. He began to ritualistically remove his clothes along with all the symbolic items he was wearing, like his Texas flag amulet, his Celtic knots pendant, and 2 rings he'd gotten from his parents. No pride, no protection, no identity, truly naked. He punched himself in the face. He broke out in a cold sweat. He puked until there was nothing left in him. Then he passed out. The next morning he awoke feeling rejuvenated. He threw some clothes on, made tea, and went out for a walk, feeling a new kind of energy running through his body. As he turned a corner in the jungle, he came upon a large pulsing ball of neon colors hovering over the muddy ground. It was stunning. It took a few moments, but then he realized what it was. A huge mass of swarming butterflies. Staring at this amazing sight, Matthew heard a voice in his head say, "All I want is what I can see. All I can see is in front of me." For the first time on the trip, he was no longer in a state of hurried expectation. Everything slowed down. He looked to the sky and gave thanks. As his eyes fell back to the earth, he noticed what lay ahead. Just beyond the butterflies was the Amazon River. Later, as he lay floating on it, he saw what looked like a mermaid's tail wave past him, swimming downriver. Accepting the challenge. After having his first wet dream in 1994, Matthew did not have another one until 1999, When precisely the same incident took place, he was in Ireland, where he had just finished filming his role in the television show Rain of Fire. A never-ending line of indigenous Africans can be seen floating in the Amazon alongside snakes and crocodiles. 11 seconds done. This time around, he was very confident that he had to travel to Africa. While he was once again scanning his map and looking for clues, he happened to be listening to the music of Ali Farka Touré, who is an African bluesman. He didn't know much about the enormous continent, but he happened to be listening to it. He set the atlas aside, reached for the CD jewel cover, and began perusing the liner notes. Near Funke, Mali. That was the location where he needed to be. Matthew purchased a ticket on a flight that would only take him to Bamako, the capital city of Mali, and located a guide by the name of Issa who could take him up the Niger River to near Funke. When he arrived there, he discovered Ali Farka at the house of his second wife, and the two of them ate lunch together while listening to some of Ali Farka's songs. But while they were saying their goodbyes, Matthew couldn't help but worry if this was actually the last stop. Then, out of the blue, his guide Issa informed him about the Dogon, who are a very magical people of Mali who have been getting wisdom from the stars for a very long time prior to the development of modern astronomy. They had relocated to the Bandiagara escarpment, which is located in close proximity to the Niger River, and had a number of small communities. Issa recommended this location to him, saying, "I think this is an excellent area for you to go." Matthew was in agreement. At this point, it's important to bring out that Matthew went on this journey under a false identity. He informed people that his name was David, which they translated as Douda, and that he was a writer as well as a boxer. He also said that he was a boxer. What he didn't expect was for word to quickly spread across Bandiagara that a powerful white man had arrived in the community after his arrival there. Soon after, Michelle, the reigning champion wrestler in Matthew's area, presented him with a challenge. Oh shit was all he could think. But Matthew was unable to say no, even when he was standing in front of Michelle, who had a massive chest and a burlap sack tied around his waist. It was turned on. As the two men stepped into the enormous dirt hole, a throng had soon gathered around them, and they were yelling with approbation as they did so. As they fought each other with weapons, the leader of the village acted as a referee for the conflict. Both fighters were knocked down multiple times throughout the course of the contest, which consisted of 2 rounds. At one point of the match, Matthew was able to execute a well-known move from the World Wrestling Federation, WWF, called the Boston Crab. This move consists of one wrestler getting on his opponent's back and wrapping both hands around his chin while dragging his head downward. But Michelle was able to free himself from the hold, throw Matthew to the ground, and secure him in a scissor hold between his 2 huge legs. The 2 men continued to wrestle with one another in the mud until they were both completely spent. The chief of the village broke up the fight by raising both of the men's arms into the air to signal that the bout was over. Even though it was obvious that neither side was going to win, Matthew was astonished to hear the audience chanting, "Douda! Douda!" When asked about it afterwards, the leader of the village said that Matthew's victory was certain the moment he accepted the challenge. Changing roles. Matthew had to wait another 5 years before having his third wet dream that was not sexual in nature. By 2005, he had already established himself as a leading guy in a number of critically acclaimed romantic comedies. Although he had never had anything against this form of entertainment, he wouldn't be lying if he stated that it was creatively rewarding for him to engage in such activities. He had reached a point in his life where it was time to start a new chapter. The third wet dream came, but this time it was very different from the other ones. It was almost like a clockwork pattern. Matthew had reached the age of 88 at this point. He was relaxing on a veranda which overlooked a wide horseshoe-shaped road that was in front of him. 22 mothers and 88 children were present when they arrived. Everyone who was a member of his family gathered around so that he could take a picture of them with their father. It wasn't until the image was taken that he came in and got out of bed. Matthew was brought back to the thought that he had always wanted to have a family of his own. In point of fact, he could say with absolute certainty that it was one of the few things he had ever known in his entire life. Now, in the middle of his 30s, the moment had come. However, it was time to try a different strategy. He was going to give up the search for the woman of his dreams and instead just sit back and allow fate to take its course. And sure enough, right around that time, Camilla showed up. It was one of those instances in which he recognized her from across a busy restaurant. It took place in the Hyde Club on Sunset Boulevard, and the instant Matthew laid eyes on her, he knew he had no choice but to talk to her. Therefore, he proceeded to come over to a table and offered to prepare an excellent margarita for her. Matthew was convinced at the conclusion of their first date that he had finally met the mermaid who had waved to him while he was swimming in the Amazon River. She had arrived in Hollywood after having navigated away into the waters of the Pacific Ocean. She was still the only woman to whom he wanted to wish a good morning after these 15 years have passed. Matthew made the decision to reimagine his professional path as Camilla stood by his side. He informed his agent that he was finished with romantic comedies and that he did not want to see any more scripts for romantic comedies come his way. He also stated that he did not want to act in any more romantic comedies. This was a hazardous move because Hollywood has a tendency to forget about those who turn down too many of their offers. But there was never any question in anyone's mind that this was the course of action that needed to be taken. In order to star in romantic comedies, he was being offered more than $14 million each film, but he declined these offers. After that, no more deals were made available. Matthew ultimately spent the better part of 2 years without a job, but during that period he gave birth to 2 children, so it's not like he was just sitting around doing nothing. And finally, Hollywood started looking at him as an interesting new thing that was happening there. It all started with a Lincoln lawyer and was followed by Killer Joe. Soon after, his longtime buddy Richard Linklater gave him a call to offer him a part in Bernie. After that, Jeff Nichols created a role in the film Mud just for him, and Steven Soderbergh cast him in the role of Magic Mike. The term reconnaissance started to circulate among the populace. They were unaware of the fact that Matthew had first used this expression in an interview for MTV when he was a guest. Wild and essential. The film Dallas Buyers Club was unique in comparison to previous films. In 2007, Matthew had read the script and had an interest in playing the lead role of Ron Woodruff, a real-life individual who had, during the course of his life, developed his own program for distributing HIV medication. Matthew became connected to the idea of playing the role of Ron Woodruff, but it wasn't until January 2012 when Canadian filmmaker Jean-Marc Vallée joined on board that production finally started moving forward. When it came to determining whether or not Matthew was the right person for the job, Vallée had some reservations. After all, he had a well-deserved reputation for being in excellent physical condition. How was he meant to be convincing as a man who was in stage 4 of the HIV disease? But Matthew assuaged his fears by assuring him that he would handle the situation. They devised a strategy to have everything ready by October 2012. Matthew would consistently shed 2.5 pounds over the course of a week in the 5 months leading up to the production. His breakfast consisted of 3 egg whites, and for both lunch and dinner he ate 5 ounces of fish, along with 1 cup of steamed vegetables. His diet was very strict. On the bright side, he was free to consume an unlimited amount of wine whenever he pleased. Matthew's weight loss was consistent and noticeable throughout the course of the diet's duration. When he weighed 157 pounds, he participated in the production of The Wolf of Wall Street, directed by Martin Scorsese, for a couple of days. He portrayed a broker by the name of Mark Hanna, whose key to success was getting high and hooking up with women. That was pretty much all he needed to know in order to put himself in the mindset of that persona. In the sequence he shared with Leonardo DiCaprio, he was free to entirely deviate from the script and execute what he refers to as a lunatic to the marvelous musical riff-raff. Concerning the part played by Ron Woodruff, Matthew was in a position to have more first-hand knowledge. It was quite good of Woodruff's family to invite him into their home, chat to him, and even lend him Woodruff's diaries, and 10 hours' worth of voice recordings that he had made. These disclosed an astonishing amount of information about Ron. Matthew was able to create a performance that garnered him praise and prizes thanks in large part to all these factors as well as Vallée's sensitivity behind the camera. It didn't hurt that while the awards campaign was going on, there was a new episode of True Detective on every Sunday night. On that show, Matthew got to delve deeper into one of his favorite characters, the greatest detective he had ever known, Rustin Cohle. In addition, the role of True Detective provided him the chance to collaborate with his longtime friend and brother from another mother, Woody Harrelson. At long last, Matthew was able to achieve a level of contentment that was sustained by his employment. He was delving to the depths, creating one-of-a-kind people from the inside out and presenting stories that were both wild and vital, putting himself in the best position to obtain go-aheads and to make the most of such opportunities. According to him, the key to his success has been learning to make peace with the inevitability of some outcomes. This voyage will at some point come to an end, and that is the one thing that is unavoidable for any one of us. But the way in which you choose to spend your life is entirely up to you. It's all relative. This is how Matthew's narrative has unfolded up until this point. It's now your turn to make the most of what you have. However, they were encouraging of his ambition to live an artistic life and supported him in this endeavor. After changing his focus to study film in college, Matthew got his big break when he was cast in the movie Dazed and Confused. After that, he became a household name because of his performance in A Time to Kill. Matthew's meteoric rise to popularity was not without its challenges, but after doing some introspective work and pursuing some prophetic wet dreams, he was able to overcome his vanity and refocus his attention on the things that are truly important in life. He was ultimately able to learn how to prioritize his family with the assistance of his wife, Camilla, while simultaneously changing his career to move away from romantic comedies and toward intriguing and creative, serious roles.